Many of the difficulties faced by contractors and builders are things that have been around for years or decades, and a lot of them are obvious reasons why there's a housing problem or housing shortage. And this article in The Atlantic really has some insight into what's going on with housing and really, more importantly, what to expect in the future. The article has to do with homelessness, right, which is related to housing and construction, but there's a key hidden feature of this article that everybody needs to see. The subtitle of this is Why Everyone's Ignoring It. Well, if you're in the building industry, you haven't been ignoring it. The answer to homelessness, or the problem that created it, has been around for 10, sometimes 20 years in some areas, and anybody that's been around building and construction knows this problem. We're not ignoring it. We've seen it. So let's take a closer look. Buried in this article, after talking about all kinds of other factors, mental issues, drugs, crime, everything else, it says, what changed that caused homelessness to explode? Again, it's simple. Lack of housing. Okay, that's not really the problem. But it says the places people needed to move for good jobs stopped building the housing necessary. Okay, what's wrong with that sentence? The places people needed to move stopped building. Well, places don't build houses, right? So let's pick any city that has a housing problem. Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, Portland, New York, right? The city of Los Angeles doesn't build. They're not contractors. The city council doesn't build housing, right? They don't have circular saws and lumber and cement mixers. They don't build houses. The people who build houses are contractors and construction companies and home builders. That's who builds, right? So the places do not build housing. Companies build housing, or contractors build housing. So why didn't they? It says, stop building. Let's change places to contractors. Why did contractors stop building? Why did builders stop building? Why did construction companies stop building in those areas where there's housing problems? Well, it's real simple. Laws and cost. In all of these areas, there is significant obstacles to building homes. Look, it's not like construction companies don't want to build houses. That's how you make your money. If you're a contractor and you're a builder, you don't make money just sitting around twiddling your thumbs. The only way you make money is if you build and complete a home to sell, or build and complete a structure to sell, right? Maybe you're building it for somebody else, but that's how you make money. So when you say stop building, there's no reason for a construction company to stop building. They want to build. But if in that area it's either impractical, too expensive, or impossible to build, you're going to go build somewhere else, right? So places like Texas, north of Dallas, there's suburbs, Frisco, Prosper, Plano, that they're building houses left and right. At least they were before interest rates went up. You could go buy a subdivision one day and it would be empty lots. You go buy a month later and there's 20 new houses ready to move into. They're building quick because the permitting process, the approval process is not fraught with obstacles. In some parts of California, builders report that in order to build a new home, from the time that you buy the property until the time that you can hand over a key to somebody, it's 2 to 3 years, because if you have to wait for this permit or impact fees or land use development or coastal commission approvals. All these different bureaucratic processes have to happen, right? And also, in some states, there are allowances for anybody to come forward and say, I object to this. If you're a neighbor, if you're an environmental company or environmental agency, if you are a nonprofit that says, well, this is going to have an impact on somebody, they can file a lawsuit to stop it, and you have to go through that process. And when that lawsuit is done, somebody else can file a lawsuit. So it's not that builders don't want to build, places don't build, like the article says. It's that it's impossible to do. Also, in some jurisdictions, the intrinsic cost, besides the land and the materials and the labor that's built in, can be cost inefficient. So if you buy a lot and you want to build a single family home and have all your costs involved for selling the house. In most parts of the country, it might cost you 10 or 15, maybe $20,000 for the permits, for the approvals, and all the fees that go along with the infrastructure fees, and you can bake that into the price of a $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000 house, right? A $300,000 house, if you have $15,000 in fees, that's like 5% of the total. In some parts of the country, the fees are $200,000. In some parts of California, all the fees for a regular single-family house is $200,000. So how are you going to bake that into a $300,000 or $400,000 house? Even if you bake it into a $500,000 house, that's like 40%. So you have to mark it up that much. Plus, the carrying cost of that property for 2 or 3 years adds up. If you can buy a parcel, put a house on it, flip it, and get it delivered within 3 or 4 months, like you can in Texas or Georgia or other parts of the country, you don't have to bake in carrying costs as a builder. If it's going to take you 2 or 3 years to get the project done, now you have to factor in 3 years worth of interest, taxes, insurance, all the other things that go into that house, and that might add another $50,000 or $80,000 or $100,000 to the cost of the project. So when this publication, The Atlantic, says, what caused homelessness to explode? Lack of housing. That's true. And it says places stopped building. Well, that's the reason they stopped building. It's not because the builders don't want to build. Builders love building. I can tell you from experience, contractors love completing projects. We love doing deals. We love getting things done. We love getting houses out there in the marketplace, right? The only reason that any builder is going to stop building in a certain area is if it's because it's impossible to turn out a house for a reasonable profit. Another proof that that's the reason is in the same paragraph. It says homelessness crisis only goes back to the 1980s, right? Which is true. And also, why does Los Angeles have more homeless than Duluth? Well, it's because you can build more in Duluth, right? Where Los Angeles you can't. In the 1980s is when a lot of these rules started to come into play. The impact fees, the coastal commissions, the environmental. Look, I don't want to pick on California or New York or Washington or Oregon or anywhere else, but the policymakers that are really intending to want to have more houses built don't recognize that's the problem. In fact, they tell you right here, when they think that places build houses, they don't recognize what the problem is. In fact, even within this article, which has a lot to do with trying to solve the problem, most of the article talks about the reason you want to fix this is because if you don't, it's going to hurt you politically, not that it's going to help people get into homes. And not to make this political, but it says right here, few Republican states have had to deal with homelessness because most of the cities are in Democratic states. Is that a coincidence? Right? Republican states generally have less impact fees, less problems getting homes built. Right? Whether that's right or wrong, again, I'm not picking sides. I'm just saying it's a reality. And the article even acknowledges it. Local politicians have spawned a web of regulations, laws, and norms that made blocking the development of new homes simple. And that's in mostly Democratic politicians, right? They have created laws that block development. Now, in many cases, the laws were intended to have a good reason for existing. Environmental, impacts, quality of living, all these things. But when you make it that easy to block development, those tools are going to be maybe misused. And like we've said before, the result is that the U.S. is millions of homes short of what the population needs. Probably 5 million homes short of the need right now, not counting what happens in the next couple of years. And again, the primary focus of this article is that worrying about voter exasperation, spelling trouble for politicians, right? Voters will tolerate disorder only for so long before you have other candidates. So it's basically saying that if you're a Democrat and you're voting for laws that restrict housing development, eventually you're going to get voted out of office. materialize to run against mainstream Democrats that are trying to solve homelessness, right? So the big issue they're taking away is, if you're a Democrat, watch out for voting for these laws, because you're going to be at risk of getting replaced in your office. By and large, the candidates challenging the governance of regions are not proposing policies that would substantially increase production of housing, right? So they're even recognizing that there's nothing in the pipeline that's going to change these policies. And again, they point out the political risk, political dangers to Democrats in cities where homelessness, Democratic inaction risks sparking a broader political revolt, meaning that people are going to get fed up with it and want to vote for somebody else, right? So they're talking more about the risk to the Democratic politicians than the risk to actual people that need homes. Look, the reality is, in order to have less of a burden on people that need to live in a house, you have to have more houses. Certainly some of them will need to be less expensive. If you build 5 million multi-million-dollar houses, that's not going to help anything directly. It might push some people up in the pipeline and maybe free up some lower priced homes. But the reality is, you have to build homes that an everyday person can afford. If you just try to build homes that disadvantaged or homeless people can afford, it's almost a losing proposition, because even if you built a house that somebody could buy for $200,000, right? A homeless person can't afford a $200,000 house. In most cases, their income doesn't allow it, because there's houses you can rent right now that they can't afford. It's not an indictment of that population. It's just what goes into the policies that are needed to be done in politics, in bureaucracy, to get more houses built. And the answer is to at least recognize that a lot of the obstacles are self-inflicted, right? If you want to have more homes built, make it possible for the homes to be built in a short period of time. Forget about the money. Look, if you're a jurisdiction that wants to have homes be built cheaper, and if you waived all your fees, if you're in a California county where there's $200,000 in fees to build a new house, even if you waive all the fees, no builder is even going to jump in and build a house, even if the fees are free, if it's going to take 3 years to build, and it can be objected to by many activist groups, right? The fees are only part of it. They are part of it, but they're not the only thing. I don't see a way you can eliminate all that unless you change the laws, and no one has the willpower to do that right now. So what's going to happen is, builders who are skilled at their craft, that want to have a good career in construction, they're going to build somewhere else. They're going to go to a different state. They're going to go to Idaho, Texas, Utah, South Dakota, somewhere else where they can build. There was an interview with a developer who wanted to build a 20-unit medium income market rent, not market rent, below market rent apartment building in the Bay Area of California. I believe it was Berkeley. And when he started the process in the 1990s, early 1990s, he figured it would take him 6 years or so, 5 or 6 years to get it done. And he was willing to do that. Well, it's now 15 years later. It's 20 years later. 20-something years later. And the project hasn't even scraped the ground yet. And they interviewed the guy and said, look, I'm now 50-something years old. I want to have a career where I build things for a living. If it's going to take me my whole life to build one building, I'm not going to have much of a career. It's not very fulfilling for me. So I'm going somewhere else. So all the money and all the effort he put into trying to build something that could add housing units to his community is all out the window, because now he's going to go build somewhere else. And again, whether it's right or wrong, agree, disagree, that's not the point. We're not taking sides. We're just saying that if there's a genuine interest in creating more housing units, you have to look at the actual source of the obstacle. And this article glosses over it a little bit. They say that places build real estate. Places build housing. They don't. People and companies build housing. And places can get in the way of it, but they can't actually do the construction for you. Thoughts, comments below, much appreciated.